here for this like workshop and talk, but generally for being here, stopping the arms fair. It's such an important actions that everyone's been taking. So I'm part of the London Mining Network, and we're an alliance or coalition of 22 different human rights, environmental and solidarity groups who work with, alongside and learn from mining affected communities, indigenous peoples and workers from South Africa, Eritrea, Madagascar to Colombia, Chile and Brazil, to India, Mongolia, to Indonesia and the Philippines. What connects these quite disparate and distant geographies together and their struggles is the London Stock Exchange, which is the epicenter of the mining industry, the global mining industry. There are 4 out of the biggest 5 mining companies in the world are listed on the London Stock Exchange. Anyone know which companies they are or heard of them? Rio Tinto is one of them, yeah. BlackRock, that's sort of asset management investment, but they invest in a lot of these mining companies. One of the biggest shareholders, yeah, definitely. Rio Tinto, any others? Glencore, yeah, definitely. Anglo-Swiss company. 2 more. Adani, that's an Indian coal company. They're not listed on the London Stock Exchange though. Ineos Fracking, yeah, gas fracking company, also on the London Stock Exchange. Then there's also Anglo American and Rio Tinto, or we've had that, or BHP Billiton, another Anglo-Australian one. And as a network, what we do, we work to hold these mining companies to account for their crimes against people and nature. And the history of these mining companies should remind all of us to keep and center the questions of colonialism and imperialism in our understandings of the arms trade and the mining trade today. So Anglo American, for example, was set up and profited majorly from Cecil Rhodes's settler colonization of Southern Africa, one of the biggest beneficiaries of apartheid, with a huge number of gold mines and diamond mines in Southern Africa. Then Rio Tinto, people might have heard of for being the main sort of provider of uranium for Britain's nuclear arsenal. So they were getting most of the uranium from occupied Rusing mine in Namibia while it was occupied by apartheid South Africa. Then BHP Billiton is entangled with the history of the settler colonization of Australia and genocides against Aboriginal peoples there. So with London Mining Network, I was very fortunate enough to author this report on martial mining, which is about resisting war and extractivism together and thinking through the links between the arms trade and the mining industry. And I think what's important to note as well is that martial mining and this cycle is not an original contribution of mine, but is a reflection of the experiences of land and environmental defenders around the world, 4 of whom are murdered on average every week. Remember the names of Berta Cáceres, Bazooka Radebe, and Mambush Noki Presente. So the communities that we work with, they know intimately that the multinational mining companies that are taking resources from under their feet and villages, the multinational mining companies that are polluting the water, the soil, and the air that they depend on for sustenance and survival, that these companies are inextricable from the police, the army, the private security contractors who forcibly evict them from their lands, who guard new borders and fences on their lands and protect the extraction of resources for the necessities or delicacies of consumers here, like this mobile phone that I'm using, and also like the weapons of mass destruction that we're seeing going past us on the roads today and over the course of this week. But what the martial mining cycle does do is, I think, help us think a little bit critically, and I'm going to be interested to hear what everyone else has to think about this, about it starts here. And think about, where is the here? Where does it start? Where does war start? So I'll show you a little graphic that we made, which might help us go through this cycle a little bit together. So this is the martial mining cycle, just showing how all of these things kind of link together. So we're kind of here in the factories or at the center where these weapons might be being produced, while they're being sold in the Excel Center behind us, before they go to military bases around the world to be tested and tried, and then to conflict zones as well. But before the Leonardo helicopters, the BAE Systems tanks, the Raytheon missiles get into the center here behind us, and then travel on their onwards journeys to Saudi Arabia and Egypt, to Israel and Turkey, India and the US, where they brutalize civilians and children and repress liberation struggles. Before they get here, before they get there, they're assembled in factories out of millions of tons of aluminium, copper, iron, gold, silver, from a global network of mines. So there are a few examples to think through again how these industries, mining and the arms industries, work together. You might think about rare earth elements, which are very integral and critical minerals that are used in a lot of pieces of military equipment. So they have a very high magnetic intensity, so you're going to find a lot of different rare earth elements in drones, in laser precision guided missiles, in any kind of sensory communication technologies. You're going to see a lot of rare earth elements. But because about 97% of reserves of rare earths are in China, it's become a very critical security issue for a lot of militaries around the world, particularly the US and Britain. So we're already seeing lots of new junior mining companies like Rare Earth Elements and Nkamgo Resources that are listed on the London Stock Exchange, who are exploring and developing mines in Burundi and Malawi and have already got contracts set up with the US Department of Defense in order to sell them those minerals. So we see a very clear sort of nexus between mineral extraction and then the arms trade. The campaign that got me involved in London Mining Network, in which I've been most heavily involved in, is the Marikana Solidarity Campaign. And I got involved in that because, and I was just speaking to a gentleman earlier who was talking about the sort of history of the anti-apartheid struggles here in the UK, because my grandfather was South African, and he was exiled from the country and involved in a lot of boycott and divestment activities around companies profiting from apartheid. And Marikana is part of the sort of legacies of apartheid, as well as the illusions of a rainbow democracy that came out at the end of it. Because has anyone heard of what happened in Marikana, by the way? So this was in August 2012, 16th of August, so we're going to be commemorating the 10th anniversary next year, where at a platinum mine in the Bushveld complex, where about 80% of the world's platinum is located, mine workers went on strike for 5 months in order demanding a living wage. And to put that in context, the living wage that they were demanding was 1/236th of what the CEO of the company was earning that year. So that was what their demand was, and it was a very successful strike to hold that down for 5 weeks and 5 months, and that was possible primarily because of the determination and courage of the miners, as well as the social reproduction of the women in the communities that were sustaining the strike and supporting the mine workers on strike as well. But obviously, because the platinum industry is so crucial as a sector to the South African economy and is very, very profitable, Lunmin, as a mining company, was determined to end the strike by any means necessary. The CEO of Lunmin was in regular contact with the police and the South African military, saying that we need to bring the army and the police in to end the strike. And one particular member of the board, who people might recognize as the president of South Africa today, Cyril Ramaphosa, who owned about 9% of the company at the time, he was liaising with the state, South African state and police as well, to bring what he called these dastardly criminals, the strikers, mine workers who are on strike, bringing them to the full extent of the law, taking concomitant action or more pointed action. So there's a lot of collaboration and collusion happening between the mining company, the police, and the South African state. And on the 16th of August 2012, the day beforehand, when the CEO and the police had said together that this needs to be stopped by any means necessary, 34 mine workers were shot dead in 2 different locations, and 78 of them were injured, and in the aftermath, 287 mine workers were incarcerated, and dozens of them are still in jail today as a result of having supported their comrades on strike. So we see a massive act of state violence, the biggest in post-apartheid South African history, which was a moment of state violence which was sedimented on top of decades of environmental and social violence, of air pollution, of contamination of the groundwaters in Marikana. and of a huge amount of labor exploitation as well. So while this strike was happening, the UK had sold 328 million worth of arms sales to South Africa just in that year, and $1 billion over the course of the decade. Another really important example that we talk through in this report is in West Papua, which is a liberation struggle against Indonesian occupation. And a lot of that struggle has centered around Grasberg mine, which is one of the biggest copper and gold mines in the world. And hundreds of West Papuan freedom fighters have been murdered around the premises of the mine by private security contractors and the Indonesian paramilitary police brigades. And Rio Tinto has been one of the primary beneficiaries of that mine, profiting billions and billions and billions of pounds, whilst the people of West Papua have continued to suffer from the occupation and the extraction and removal of their resources and the desecration of their sacred lands. And again, to reinforce that cycle, the UK has sold over 750 million pounds worth of arms sales to Indonesia in the last decade as well. So again, we're seeing those links between the mining and the arms trades in these very sort of specific geographies like Marikana and West Papua. And I think what these places, for me, what they bring together and what they're describing here is obviously it's a relation of imperialism, where British arms companies are profiting from selling arms to neo-colonial administrations, which are then repressing their own people so that British mining companies can continue to extract resources from them. And this is, of course, also sustained by a network of military bases. The UK has 142 military bases around the world, so that these arms sales, these military bases, can keep these repressive regimes in power and enable this continued ecocidal resource extraction to take place. And a primary example of that, which we don't often hear about enough here in the UK, is Oman, which is the host. I wouldn't even call it the host. Is still basically a military occupation by the British state, has the largest UK naval base and does a lot of trainings there for the UK military, which is also, I think, something we might hear more about later on in the day in terms of how the British military is responding to the climate emergency. One of the ways in which it's doing so is by changing its military bases and where they do a lot of their training. So to prepare for a world in which may well be 3 to 5 degrees warmer by the end of the century, the British military is moving a lot of its equipment and a lot of its training exercises to Oman, because that's going to be exemplified with the kind of extreme temperatures that they're anticipating that they're going to be fighting within over the course of this century. But Oman also hosts some of the biggest smelters and refineries for metals and mineral resources, also owned by Rio Tinto. It has huge oil and gas fields, which have Shell and BP as some of their primary beneficiaries. And it's also the highest defense spender per capita out of any country in the world. And this has all kind of coalesced in a huge amount of brutal torture and violence against anti-imperialist and pro-democracy protesters across the country, one of whom I'm privileged and honoured to call my friend, who was in solitary confinement for 57 days for protesting against the visit of Prince Charles to the country in order to sign off an arms deal for BAE Systems and a new oil and gas concession contract for BP. So the communities on the front line of the British companies, mining companies and arms companies, and who are facing the states who are armed with British weapons, whether that be in Madagascar, in West Papua, in Congo, in Colombia, in Chile, Brazil, Philippines, South Africa, they know already that mining and fossil fuel companies would be unable to rob their lands of billions of pounds worth of resources without these weapons and technologies. So I think the key thing that I wanted to bring together about Marshall Mining and Marshall Mining as a cycle is that when we're thinking about stopping the arms fair and shutting down Dicey, and thinking about what the abolition of the military-industrial complex entails, I think for the communities that we work with, one of the most important parts of that, the movements that are resisting extractive industries who are destroying the planet, are strengthened when the weapons that suppress and repress them and murder them are taken out of the hands of their local oppressors as well as their global ones. I think that also teaches us, and what they've taught me, is that every war, every nuclear submarine before it even enters this center, every drone, every tank is already a climate catastrophe. There's already a climate catastrophe. Before they even enter this centre, they've already led to billions of tons of pollution that have destroyed sacred lands, rivers, oceans that people depend on for their sustenance and survival. And the opposite, or the converse of that, I also believe to be true, that every struggle against mining is not only a struggle for life, for dignity, for water, for land, for soil, and for the earth, but also fundamentally disrupts the global supply chains for arms companies and imperialist powers like the ones that we're opposing here today. So the key message that we want to talk about at London Mining Network, and through this report that tries to bring together our struggles against the mining industry and against the arms trades, is that when our oppressors are collaborating with each other, when they're exchanging their tactics and tools of repression, and when the minerals, the rare earth elements, the platinum, the aluminium, the copper, the cobalt that is being extracted from these lands then gets made into these weapons of destruction and control that go on to then bomb other countries and destroy other communities around the world, that if they are collaborating, then our struggles must be as well. So our struggles must be articulated and enacted as equally shared and indivisible ones too. So that's all that I have to say as a sort of introduction to the report, but I've brought a load of copies with me and I'm happy to share them around with people, and there's some leaflets here with a QR code. I'd really appreciate and encourage people to read it, and I'd love to hear people's comments and questions now so we can have a general discussion about what we understand these links between these two industries that we absolutely need to dismantle and abolish in order to have any kind of livable future on this planet, not just for our sake but in solidarity with all the communities around the world who are resisting them. So thank you for having me here, and solidarity. Behind us, the incredible individuals that are all here today, and collectives and organizations are here to resist and stop that from happening. And what this talk is basically trying to bring together is how all of those arms companies depend on these big mining companies as well, because without them they wouldn't have the resources to put together these equipment that are being sold in the Excel Center behind us. But thank you for your question. I can understand, yeah. Yeah.
So the question is, was Dicey known as something else before it changed its name to Dicey? Because I was told it wasn't always known as Dicey, and that it wasn't integrated with the police. It was two separate things, and then they merged into one.
I don't know about that. Does anyone else have an answer for that? Yeah, I'm not aware of it having had a name before Dicey, but you might be right. I'll look into it. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hello.
I was wondering if I guess it's not going to happen with the mining industries, but like maybe the arms companies, but taken any kind of environmental responsibility for the effects of their weaponry, because something which I sort of found out about not too long ago was, I guess, like the sort of greenwashing of the Israeli military, and how they'll sort of claim to be sort of sustainable. And I was wondering if you knew about any sort of greenwashing of mining or arms companies to try and at least present like they're making a difference or taking responsibility for their actions, or is it just like total all out destruction?
Yeah, really good question. I think there are two parts to that as well. So I think what really good point that you mentioned is on sort of greenwashing of the military. and there's a whole section on that in the report on green weapons. So a lot of these arms dealers are greenwashing now. You mentioned the Israeli army, so they were the first to bring through these lithium-ion battery tanks. There's also Lockheed Martin, which is selling solar-powered drones and solar-powered submarines. So we're having all sorts of like greenwashing of the military that's coming in, and also militaries who are trying to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. So a lot of that kind of activity is happening within the arms industry. And then the other side to that is the kind of corporate, well, what has been sort of termed the corporate counterinsurgency of the mining companies. So a lot of mining companies, particularly the four that I mentioned, who I got in contact with when I was writing this report and asked them for responses to a few questions, they will always frame their activities as benefiting the kind of social good. So now the fact that cobalt and lithium, copper, platinum are essential for renewable and energy technologies, that's one of their primary PR selling points. So none of them want to take any ownership of or recognize the fact that any of their minerals might end up in weapons of mass destruction. They like to say, we build schools and hospitals and solar panels out of our materials. So the mining industry definitely doing a lot of greenwashing, which is why also acknowledging and raising awareness of the fact that these are the companies that also materialize the arms industry and global empire is an important way of kind of disrupting those greenwashing narratives too. So I think on both sides, the military is greenwashing by trying to transition or decarbonize the military. But at the same time, mining companies don't tend to want to take ownership of the fact that their minerals are being used for these purposes. They are greenwashing as well by saying that they're essential for the fourth industrial revolution, green energy transition. So on both those sides, greenwashing is definitely something that needs to be kind of unsettled and disrupted and shown for what it really is, which is just profiting off the destruction of the planet. Yeah. Oh, loads. Awesome. Do you want to come? Do you want to come? Your hand was up first, I remember seeing. I'll come. Thank you.
No, I just wondered how much support you've got sort of over the world. Do you know what your membership is like, and are you sort of, is it easy to recruit people to join your organisation?
Mm-hmm. So it's less to do with like recruiting and more sort of when, I mean, we have a lot of research and education components to the work that we do, and when we hear or know that there's a new mine that's being proposed or being developed, like a lithium mine in Serbia or copper mine in the Philippines, we get in contact with, I mean, London Mining Network set up in 2007, but had existed in previous iterations like Mining Watch and other groups beforehand, and Partisans, which was mainly focused on Rio Tinto and its uranium extraction in Namibia, like I mentioned earlier. So I think the network, the London Mining Network, has come as out of 3-4 decades of doing this work, resisting mining companies, supporting indigenous and local communities, resisting those mining companies from setting up mines or expanding them in their sort of home, in their homes or in their villages. So yeah, I think that it hasn't. We do. I wouldn't really call it recruitment. We do awareness. We go and do workshops in schools and universities and raise awareness about the mining industry. Do we want to move in? Yeah. Let's get under.
Oh no! Well, it's been sunny all week.
Does that answer your question, by the way? Is that fine? Yeah. Anyone else here with their hand up? Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, so if people want to take some of these, pass them round.
Do you want donations for them? I don't even
Actually,
know.
can I mention that?
Yeah, please.
So these are free, handing out. Don't feel obligated to donate anything, take one. But London Mining Network does take donations on our website, and at the moment we're organising a fundraiser particularly for Sinatemba, which is a women's organisation in Marikana, who've been organising to support the community healing from the state violence that has been acted against them, but also with a broader focus about gender-based violence within the community as well. So it has that kind of two-angled approach about violence within the community and then violence which has been inflicted on the community, which are obviously not two separate things either. So we're fundraising for Cinetember at the moment, and that fundraiser's on the LMN website as well. So if people enjoy the report, feel free to donate on that website, and any donations that LMN takes usually go to support our work, which is bringing Indigenous leaders, community representatives over to London so they can speak at the annual general meetings of these mining companies. We bring them in so they can ask questions to the chief executives and senior people within the company directly. So that's most of what our resources as an organisation go to.
Thanks. I was just gonna ask, what do you think is like the most effective way, or if you have any advice on how to challenge the narrative that's really prevalent that like, especially within the kind of greenwashing liberal kind of circles of like, oh, look at these horrible repressive regimes who are like, you know, protecting the mining industry, and look at all of these like armed groups and private security that are brought in, isn't that so bad? And obviously the links there is that like we, Britain, are in the centre of that and of that dynamic and causing that dynamic to be the case. So I just wondered if you had any advice on like how to make that more obvious in those spaces and those conversations.
The links between them. Well, I think what we're doing here is really important, and is part of that, having these conversations that are linking these struggles together and then taking direct actions on that basis with that awareness and consciousness. Again, like you said, we're the centre here, not just of the arms trade and the mining industry. So we, even though these geographies from West Papua to Colombia are separated by continents and oceans, they are all entangled with another because of the fact that London is the kind of perpetrator of these manifold different layers of violence against them. But also, like I mentioned, the communities that we support, their struggles can't separate these two industries from one another, and because the mine that they're either working at or that they've been evicted from the land from is protected by armed guards, by tanks, by helicopters, by drones. So they know that the arms industry and the mining industry collaborate with each other and depend on one another. So every action that they take, whether that's a strike, whether that's a protest and a demonstration where they're putting their lives on the line to stop a mine from going ahead, we know that that's the front lines of the climate crisis, and those are the people who are most at risk and putting their lives on the line every single day. So supporting their struggles in the ways that we try to as an organisation, by making sure that their voices are being heard in the centres of power, that they're able to come and tell the truth about what's happening in their communities to shareholders. And you have different levels of success at different meetings. The community representatives that usually come over really appreciate the opportunity to meet people, to talk to people, to share their stories, to let people know about what is happening on our doorsteps. But they also appreciate the opportunities to tell these mining executives and their shareholders about what they're profiting from exactly. And I've been to some AGMs where shareholders will turn around and literally abuse you and shout at you and refuse to listen, to which you usually, you either walk out or you start shouting back. It's different. And then there are some mining companies, some AGMs where they will really do the kind of corporate social responsibility shtick, and they're, oh, we really care, this is really important, thank you for sharing, it's so heartfelt and important, and then not do anything at all. So you have to have different strategies depending on what you're faced with. But ultimately I think we learn a huge amount from every community that we work with and how they define and choose to enact their struggle, and we support that in any way that they choose to.
Hey, I just wanted to start by saying thanks for coming, because it's like really valuable to hear all of this, and it's definitely not in my forefront of my mind so much, and you sound really knowledgeable. And I wanted to learn more about the London Stock Exchange, because you just batted off everything that was going on there, and a little bit of the history of, like, since 2007, the engagement with your organisation or maybe other organisations that have been trying to affect the stock exchange, and what we can do. Yeah.
Well, firstly, yeah, shut it down. I think, yeah, the actions that have been going directly to the City of London, shutting it down, going to their doorsteps, those are really, really important. So there are two different parts of the London Stock Exchange. One's the main stock exchange, and then one's called the Alternative Investment Market, which is like a junior one. So a lot of small companies will set up on there. So the companies that I mentioned that are just trying to start a project in Burundi or in Malawi, they'll go on the Alternative Investment Market because that means they're less regulated. They have to pay less taxes. It's just easier for them in those instances. So some member groups in the London Mining Network have campaigns to delist a company from the stock exchange. So that's, for example, the Paul Bari Solidarity Collective, who've been organising support a community in Bangladesh resisting a coal mining project, which is owned by a company called GCM, which is listed on the Alternative Investment Market. Their main demand is sort of having this company delisted. Another member organisation called Foil Vedanta had led a successful campaign to have Vedanta, another Indian mining company, delisted from the stock exchange, and that succeeded as well, because by being listed on the stock exchange, it gives them legitimacy, it gives them access to all of the capital in London, so they're within walking distance of Lloyds and Barclays, who can ensure their pipelines and their mines and everything to do with that. So yeah, the stock exchange weaves together all of these industries, and then I think the gentleman earlier who mentioned BlackRock as well. You'll have these big investment asset management companies that are again invested in these exacts in the mining industry and in the arms industry. So sometimes, we can, by seeing these things as inherently interlinked and connected, you can see the kind of focal points where they overlap with each other, and that can be a really useful place to target as well. I think on that, there's another interesting example to note, which is I'm told most of us here know about Lockheed Martin. And interestingly, Lockheed Martin is now the biggest owner of international seabed in the world. So via a subsidiary company called UK Seabed Resources, they are now moving into deep sea mining operations, which they're using, say, this is more environmentally sustainable than terrestrial like mining. So we're going to mine the depths of the oceans. Owned by, again, biggest arms company in the world. So what are they using the resources for? And obviously this is being resisted, hell-bent resistance by Pacific Island communities who know what the impacts, or none of us know what the impacts could possibly be, because we know more about the surface of the moon than the depths of the oceans. But the extinction of species, of fish, like and food chains that's feed billions of people around the world who are dependent on it. We have companies like Lockheed Martin which are putting that at threat at the moment. So Deep Sea Mining Campaign is another group within the London Mining Network. But again, when we see within one company, UK Seabed Resources, which is being propelled through all of its kind of applications by the British government, we see where we can potentially target that is going to hit all of these actors at the same time. So that kind of research can be important to think about where do we target and how, because you have to be strategic about it.